All right, welcome back to the Goals.com podcast, the show where we uncover what drives sales performance at the highest levels. Today, we're sitting down with Neil Benedict, founder of Silver Brick Management and Sandler training partner in Houston. Neil spent his career helping companies turn sales from a guessing game into a repeatable, scalable process, from startups to global enterprises. We'll talk about what great sales leadership looks like, why he calls sales the noblest profession, and how to build teams that don't just hit quota, they redefine it. Neil, you founded Silver Brick to help companies build stronger sales foundations. In your experience, what's the biggest misconception leaders have about what it really takes to build a high-performing sales organization?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception that I often see, and I think there are many, but I think one of the bigger ones that we often see is that leaders believing that you just have to hire the right people and then you'll be fine. You'll bring them into the organization, you'll be hands off. I think that's a myth. I think the truth is the best salespeople need structure, they need coaching, they need accountability, and you can't hire your way out of a weak system. So great sales organizations aren't built on talent, they're built on processes, they're built on clarity, they're built on consistency. And it's just like a really good sports team. Players need a playbook and they need a coach. And without those, they potentially never reach their full capabilities and the organization just doesn't perform at the level that it should. So ultimately, again, you have to not only hire right, but you have to give salespeople the right structure to be successful.
Makes sense. You've said sales is the noblest of professions. Can you unpack that for us? What makes sales such a meaningful career path in your eyes?
Yeah, I think like most of us, we didn't expect to become salespeople. We probably weren't thinking at our 10-year-old birthday that I can't wait to become a salesperson later on in life. And I think most of us ended up here by either hook or crook. And so the reason why I think it is a very noble profession is if salespeople don't sell, companies don't end up building additional products, right? They might build one product, hire a sales team, and go out and try to sell it. But then if that product doesn't go successful, they don't build other products to help their customers. And operations doesn't ship product, services don't support that product, accounting doesn't build customers, and people don't get paid fundamentally. And so families literally depend on salespeople doing their jobs well and consistently in order for large organizations to thrive and survive. And so, sales has a big weight on its shoulder, both individually and as a corporate group. It's a huge responsibility and it's a privilege. When sales are done with integrity, it's not about helping ourselves make money. It's about helping others make good decisions that move their businesses forward. So salespeople at its core need to be people that value the people that they're dealing with on a regular basis, but they also need to realize that their individual and group performance are critical for a company to survive and be successful. And all the other employees, if you think about it, are dependent upon the salespeople. And so we're a noble profession because not only do we help our clients solve problems, we help generate sufficient income so that people can stay gainfully employed and that they can feed their families fundamentally.
I love that. You went from global corporations like Intel and Routers to launching your own companies. What lessons from those large organizations still shape how you lead and coach sales teams today?
Yeah, it's a great question. At Intel, it was interesting because I learned various concepts, particularly from some of our founders like Andy Grove, and some of those concepts still stick with me. Disagree and commit was a concept that Intel was big on. Below the line budgeting, even though I'm not in accounting, below the line budgeting for resources was also important. And then concepts like constructive confrontation. And so disagreeing it means that you can deliberately and passionately disagree with someone, but once the decision is made ultimately in the organization, that everybody moves forward together. It's a commitment mentality that says, even though my idea wasn't the one selected, my opinion wasn't the one chosen, I still need to move forward. Below the blind budgeting, for those that you don't know, reminds me that every single effort that we spend on one thing will deter us from spending time and effort on another thing. So we need to determine not only the things we're going to do, but more importantly, the things that we're not going to spend time on and then we're not going to do. And zero-based budgeting is a way that Intel built that process into our thinking. And then constructive confrontation is much like it sounds. It's we want to challenge ideas, we want to challenge concepts, we don't want to challenge people. People aren't the problem. The problems oftentimes are the ideas that get presented, and sometimes they need to be challenged at a level where people aren't comfortable. So again, constructive confrontation is one of those things where again, we utilize that quite heavily at a company like Intel, and that's carried over into my private business and leadership foundations because when I became an entrepreneur, some of the other things that I became acutely aware of was the need to be humble, the need to be agile, and on top of that, a structure that I could rely on. And hence, a lot of those techniques and tools I learned in places like Intel allowed me to combine both that entrepreneurial spirit, but also some foundational processes and tools to be able to successfully navigate those new enterprises.
Yeah, I've read many business books and listened to many podcasts, and Andy Grove is a common theme, the
Yes,
coach of coaches, so to speak.
absolutely.
Silver Brick provides outsourced senior sales leadership, a concept many business owners are just beginning to understand. What does that model look like in practice, and when does it make the most sense for a company?
Yeah, with fractional or outsourced sales leadership, companies get significant sales and leadership strategy, and a lot of times they get a builder to come into their organization, but at a fraction of the cost, hence the fractional nature of the role, than hiring a full-time employee. And so when the VP of sales comes into an organization bringing strategy, structure, accountability, coaching rhythms, and culture, everything that you would get from a full-time employee, but from a consulting standpoint, it allows them to have some allows the company to have some flexibility to try before you buy, try your leader out before you buy, for an example, gives you the opportunity to work with someone with a fairly high level of knowledge and experience without having to pay for that knowledge and experience of a full-time employee. And it really makes sense when a founder maybe is leading the sales organization or they have a relatively inexperienced organization or a relatively inexperienced sales manager that and they're hitting a revenue ceiling that they need to overcome. And so bringing in some expertise into the sales organization, you typically have good people already working for you. You typically have good salespeople. They've just hit a plateau and they don't know how to move to the next level. It's a good time to be thinking about bringing a fractional leader into the organization so that you can pull the expertise and the experience out of the head and out of the fingertips of that individual and apply it to your organization. And so good timing is usually when you're again hitting that revenue plateau and you don't have either the bandwidth or the resources to go out and find a extremely high level sales leadership resource.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Sandler is known for its structured, repeatable sales methodology. What makes the Sandler approach so effective, and how do you adopt it for modern buyers who have more information than ever?
Yeah, the Sandler system works primarily because it's built around psychology, not persuasion. It's really built upon the way that people think, and it's about driving equality into sales conversations. A lot of times, salespeople feel like they are subservient to the buyer because they're in a position of authority and they're so concerned about getting that buyer to purchase their product that again they elevate the buyer and they shrink themselves. And so really Sandler's fundamental premise is that you need to be at an equal business stature and have equal business relationships in order for a sale to go successfully. You can't advise somebody and ask them hard questions if you're not on an equal business stature with them. So we're really just two professionals trying to figure out if it makes sense to do business together in the sales relationship, not a power dynamic that typically happens in that sales relationship. And buyers today, they probably don't need more information. Information is plentiful. You can go pretty much anywhere and find the information you're looking for. What they really need is clarity. They need confidence that somebody has been through the situation that they've been in before. And they need a point of view that maybe challenges them to think about things in a way that they maybe haven't thought of before. Because if there are any blind spots, someone coming in and taking a look at it is really valuable to them, even if they don't end up doing business with you specifically. And we need to be able to ask really strong questions. We need to uncover the truth because we can't build a point of view successfully unless we have that. So we can't give them advice in a way that allows them to make better decisions if we don't ask good questions and we don't uncover the truth of their situation. And sometimes that means walking away. It means, learning enough about the customer to realize that we're not the right resource to help them. And so Sandler thinks about that through the entire process. So it's a very effective framework for helping buyers to make smart decisions without the pressure that oftentimes comes with a sales scenario.
Got it. A lot of sales leaders struggle to move from managing numbers to coaching people. How do you coach leaders to make that shift, and what impact does it have on team performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good question because we oftentimes confuse management with coaching and we use them synonymously in a lot of situations. And I think it's pretty simple. You know, coaching versus managing. Managing is really, and I think fundamentally, my belief is you really can't manage people. People aren't inventory, people aren't a balance sheet. And so they're very difficult to be looked at as a resource that you can manage. And I think fundamentally you want to be thinking about that even when you're managing and you're not coaching. People, you can manage agreements with people, so you should and oftentimes do create agreements with people on your team, for an example, to help them understand what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. But coaching is a little bit different. Coaching is really a two-way communication between you and the person you're coaching. It's being able to provide guidance to helping people figure out situations on their own. So instead of telling you what to do, my goal for you would be you have a sales goal that you need to go hit. How do you plan on going to do that? What are some of the things that you're going to need as far as resources? What are some of the tools you might need as far as training? What are some of the aspects of your tech stack that might drive you to be able to successfully prospect more effectively? How do we engage in a two-way conversation that outlines the types of things that you need to be doing on a regular basis to hit your goals? Also, when we think about coaching, we're looking at intrinsic motivation, trying to help people find the things that motivate them primarily and not motivate them only externally, right? Comp plans and sales certainly motivate certain behaviors and they're designed to do so, but we also want to make sure that they have an intrinsic motivation, if they find that intrinsic motivation, because you're not only trying to be the best salesperson you can be, you're trying to be the best person you can be. And coaching, you can help them through coaching getting there. You can't manage them to be the best person they can be. And so it really is a distinction between, a two-way conversation and ability to help them figure out what they need to be doing and giving them full autonomy for their own successes versus trying to manage that behavior.
Yeah, I get that. When you step into a client organization, what are the first signs you look for that tell you whether the sales culture is healthy or needs work?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not always as obvious, but I think healthy cultures really talk about, and healthy sales cultures often talk about, learning, continuous learning. If you see an organization that is up to speed on modern selling techniques, they're spending a lot of time learning from sales leaders, both inside their company and external to their company. If they are doing things like listening to sales blogs, if they are reading sales books, those types of things show an active learning process, and it shows that they're interested in continuing to improve. And so that's a really good sign. You want to look at an organization that celebrates wins and highlights the people that are bringing success to the table. If they're what have you done for me lately style of organization, usually morale is a bit damaged, and usually there are some challenges with getting people to do the right things. There should be alignment as well, people using the same language across the organization. If you're implementing a sales methodology, let's just say, for sake of argument, at Sandler, you should hear people using Sandler terminology, right? You should hear people using the terminology around upfront contracts and using terminology around the pain funnel. Because if they're not and they're implementing methodology, it's clear that that methodology is not being utilized in the organization and that they haven't embedded it. And so that can also be a challenge. And then I think also you want to make sure that there's a rhythm, a transparency between the sales team and the management. There shouldn't be a fear-based culture at all. It really should be a culture of mutual respect. And there should be a very clear method and a very clear communication around how we sell in this particular organization. So if all those things are there, I think you, generally speaking, can be assured that you have a good sales culture happening.
Yeah. You founded, I think, three startups. Not every venture goes perfectly. What's a setback that taught you something invaluable about selling, leadership, or resilience?
Yeah, I think early on, you're running when you start these businesses, you're running on enthusiasm and you're running on just pure energy. And so I think if you can quickly get to some processes, that's one thing I learned. Process, helps you to avoid those times of challenging revenue periods. For an example, if you're committed to doing the same things over and over again, you can rely on those processes. So I think that's one thing that I learned. I also learned that it's really difficult to scale a business if you don't have those processes. So if you have a lot of controlled chaos in the organization or a lot of things that are happening based on sheer willpower, those things are okay early on, but they're not sustainable long term. So you really have to figure out a way to quickly move from a energy based organization and a heavy lifting based style organization to implementing process relatively quickly. So I think clarity, process, the accountability that you need to establish with any new employees is really important because it's so easy in an early organization to be distracted by shiny objects and to do all sorts of things that really don't add to the bottom line. So again, unless you have that process and accountability with new employees you bring on board, they're going to pursue paths that, don't really benefit the growth of the organization. So I learned that as well. You really need to provide people with a lot of clarity around your thinking process, a lot of accountability about what's their behavioral patterns should look like, and you really need to try to avoid that burnout period as quickly as possible because eventually you get there, and if you don't have the processes in place, you don't only burn out, you burn out somewhat rapidly.
Yeah, no kidding. You spent 5 years working in China and have a passion for the Asia Pacific
Hmm.
region. How did that
Yes.
global experience shape your perspective on leadership and selling across cultures?
In places like China and Asia in general, people move to a different rhythm. There's a lot more need for patience in that culture. We move pretty fast as Americans, and we're pretty transparent and pretty assertive. But in a lot of Asian cultures, you have to build the relationship first. And I'm not talking about the types of relationships we're building here where you're just doing bonding and rapport. I'm talking about establishing yourself as a person who's going to be consistent and around for a while. And so that patience and that trust that gets established in Asian cultures are much more long term than they are here when it comes to getting people to make business decisions. So you have to be resilient and be committed to the process. It also taught me about more cultural awareness in general. Living in a country is so much different than traveling and visiting. And so when you're in the culture on a daily basis and you're interacting at the grocery stores and you're interacting at the day schools and you're interacting just on the street corner as a resident versus a visitor. Cultural awareness is so much more important. The way you interact with people and influence them is so much more important, and the way that you continue to find the pathways to acceptance when you're an outsider in a culture are really important as well. And so China is a very homogenous culture, for an example. Most everybody looks the same. And so when you stand out in a way that, someone like me would stand out in that culture, again, trust requires a whole lot more development than it does here in our culture. So yeah, it was definitely a great learning experience. It taught me patience. It taught me resilience, and it taught me how to navigate in a culture that doesn't accept me just based on how I look.
Sure. As technology, AI, and data continue to evolve, what do you think the sales leader of the future needs to look like? And how can today's sales managers start preparing now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think people of the future are going to need to be fluent in both AI and technology as well as people. I think AI is going to usher in, just like everyone knows already, an era where there is not only incredible amounts of information, but that information being used is being utilized at a much higher level. And so I think, the data that we can get access to with AI is going to be, again, something that it's going to be a leap like the initial iPhone was in regards to what we're able to access. I think as a leader, though, my concern is that access to data and interaction with AI minimizes this human side of the equation that we need to establish with people around us. When we coach people, they need to have trust in us, and they can't do that If we just bring data to the conversations, there's really no trust that gets developed. And AI is terrible at judgment, for an example, as well. So if AI is driving a lot of the conversation, that judgment is suspect in regards to how it's applied to an individual. And so I think the best leaders in the future are going to know how to use technology. Of course, you should become as skilled as possible utilizing things like AI. I mean, and we've got new technologies just around the corner, like quantum computing, for an example, which I'm a big advocate for and quite interested in overall. But I think that the future in sales isn't going to be less human. It's going to be more human, powered by better tools. It's going to be, it's going to be important for us to get the balance right between data, technology, tools, and then that human element. And I think, I think those people who can't get the balance right are going to struggle more so than a person or a leader that leans too heavily to one side of that equation or the other.
Neil, this was fantastic. Thank you for sharing your insights and experience. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Neil and Silver Brick Management, you can visit silverbrickmanagement.com or connect with Neil on LinkedIn. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone on your team who's looking to level up their sales game. Thank you for tuning in to the Goals.com podcast, where we explore what it really takes to lead, perform, and win in today's fast-moving sales world.
This episode is brought to you by Goals.com, the sales performance platform built to help teams stay focused, motivated, and on track. While most CRMs just track data, Goals.com drives real results. It's simple, affordable, and designed to help your sales team hit targets faster, without the headache of complex setup or costly consultants. Whether you're using a CRM or not, Goals.com works seamlessly to elevate your performance. Book a fun, fast demo today at Goals.com.